Hi and welcome to the Gemhawks YouTube channel. I hope you're having a beautiful day today. For the wire tutorial today, it's more of a putting things together technique. I'd like to show you how to create a really beautiful wire collar that costs a few pence to make and uses skills that you probably already know. So I'm wearing an example of a simplified wire collar using a couple of techniques. I'm going to show you this on the board and then we're going to create one together. I am going to pop links into the video today for 3 other tutorials that I've created in the past, which show you how to create a doodle flower charm, a wire spiral sun charm and a basic bead cage. Now all of these can be created in a few moments. They can be stockpiled for when you're bored or you've run out of mojo, and they can be used with or without any beads from your stash. So I've collected a handful of ceramic beads from my big pot of random beads left over from old projects, and I'm going to show you how you can intersperse those with your wire. You can of course use it with just wire, just a few pence to make, and really quite effective once it's created. Let's head down to the board and take a closer look. So I'm going to show you today how to use a heavy gauge wire, either 1.5 or 1.6 millimeter, which is approximately equivalent to 14 gauge, to create a nice basic wire collar. Has a wrap loop on one end and a J hook on the other. We're going to make that together today. I'm also going to pop some links into today's video to show you how you can create your spiral cages. That link is just up here now. I'm also going to put a link in for you to see how to create the sunray coil pendant, a little bit like this one. And I'm also going to share with you how you can make this design also. It's a very noisy design because there's loads of beads and chain, but this is a little sort of spiral doodle flower which is equally as beautiful in a design like this. Let's just move that out of the way so it can be noisy somewhere else. I will share with you today how you can make these very simple open spirals, which you can make with a simple loop or with a wrapped loop. And then I'll also show you how to make this large coin style closed spiral. So let's just clear the board a little bit and we'll start with the base technique. So I have here a roundabout, too much to show you all on the screen at one time. It's around about 22 inches of very heavy 1.6 millimeter gauge, equivalent to 14 gauge wire. This is in soft raw copper. Now I need to make sure that both of those ends are nice and smooth, so we'll grab those flush cutters just to tidy that end up. Now 22 inches is far more than I actually need, but it gives me an opportunity to ensure that I have a plentiful size for whichever neck I'm working for. So to begin with, I'm going to generate a wrapped loop on one end, and I'm going to just let you see the length of the wire. It's got a basic curve where it's come off of the spool. So I just want to run that through thumb and forefinger a little bit, just at the end where we're working to begin with. And I'm going to start around about 2 inches from one end, turning the wire away at just slightly less than a right angle. Now because I want to pop a J hook through here, I need a reasonably good sized aperture. So I'm going to use number 4 on my 6-step bail makers to create that round form. Because it's a heavier wire, it does take just a little bit more work. This is one of those times I would very much recommend grabbing a second set of any flat facing pliers. So chain nose pliers are ideal for something like this. I've created the round form that I want to use on one end of the design, and I'm now going to push that wire around the core as neatly and tidily as I possibly can. Now I'm looking to get a good 3 wraps, 2.5 wraps minimum. Once I get to about this stage, it becomes too stiff for me to move anymore. So I tend to employ a second set of pliers. Because I'm stronger with my right hand, I'm just going to flip that over to the other direction. And what we need to do is to support that round form and then chase that bent angle until it sits smoothly around the core. So I'm just going to use those pliers to gently coerce a nice neat coil, And I'm trying to show you that with as much space to camera as possible. It's a little bit easier if you don't have to worry about the camera angles, but we're just looking to close that up so that the wire sits flat against the core and you don't lose any of that round form. So this is a basic wrapped loop. You will have seen it many times before. However, it's a tiny bit more challenging when you're using such a heavy wire. Naturally enough, the other end of the wire is trying to hit everything in the known universe. So just when you get towards the end, just going to start opening and closing those pliers and then smoothing round in a circular motion to get that nice and smooth. So let's have a gander at what we have now. You just got a wrapped loop on one end, and then on the other end we've got a flat end. We're not going to do anything with that until we've loaded on some of our designs. So for the designs I'm going to add onto this inexpensive collar, we're going to be using 18 gauge wire. So I have a spool of copper colour wire that I'm working with today. It could equally be any of your raw copper wire. I'm just struggling to find the end. Here we go. So let's start off with an open coil giving a wrapped loop. You could just as easily create this with an open and closable simple loop. There's very little weight involved in this hanging from the frame. So you would just slide that on. Doesn't involve a lot of weight, so we wouldn't worry overly about having a wrapped loop, but I'm going to show you how to create with a wrapped loop today. So I have 1mm or 18 gauge wire. There's around about 5 inches here, and we're going to start off with a nice open spiral. So again, we're going to check that the end is cut nice and neat and flush. And then we're going to start with a reasonably large round form down at the centre until we have that round form starting off. So I'm going to give that a squish and then start to get that to function around in a spiral, form around even. Don't know where the word function came from. The key with creating spirals and coils of any kind with wire is to be nice to yourself, allow yourself time to generate the form. Try to focus on keeping a nice even distance between each rotation of that wire. And if you are making matched pairs, for instance, you wanted to go for symmetry in your inexpensive wire collar design, you'd need to cut 2 lengths of wire exactly the same to begin with, and then focus on recreating the distance, the size of that small hole where you begin, just making sure that everything is repeated. So once I have gone for 1, 2 and 3 rotations around, I'm going to pull the wire away at 90 degrees from the form. And this is because I'm making a wrapped loop on this one. You can very simply pull the wire forwards and go for a very simple loop. I'm going to hold across the wire just like so and bring that forwards. I'm going to use my round nose pliers to generate a small loop. Bring that wire tail all the way around. Now it isn't really tiny, and I haven't made a particularly neat job of that. You can obviously take a little bit more time. Basic techniques here. As I said to you, this is a design that will use basic techniques you already know. So I've wrapped 3 times around that core, which is something that I would look to recreate if I was going to use this in a project as a part of a symmetrical design. So again, we're going to close up that little end section by smoothing it against the core. Give that a squish. And there we have our wrapped loop coil. It took a matter of seconds, probably less than 2 minutes from cutting the wire to finishing up that neatening of the coil. So I'm just going to compress that coil gently. And that is now ready to go. If you wanted to recreate that to give symmetry to your design, you absolutely can. As my centerpiece today, I'm going to use this sun ray coil design, which I'm going to put a link to in the video. So you can check that out if you wanted to do something like that. If you wanted to keep with the spiral aesthetic, we can either create a simple loop spiral like this one. This is a closed coin spiral, and I'm going to show you how to do that now. Just going to unspool a little bit more wire this time, probably around about 10 to 12 inches. And again, we're going to start by ensuring we have a nice smooth cut on the business end where we start with our round nose pliers. Now again, if you were going to create a couple of these to sit opposite one another, you would want to make sure that your central aperture is going to be at the same position on your pliers. You can pop a little bit of marker pen just on the pliers if you wanted to manage that effectively, or you can just, like I do, eyeball it and see how you go. So when you're creating a closed up spiral, what we're looking to do is take very small movements. If I move that one over and put my hand in the middle, it should focus properly. And we're going to rotate around and around. Now I'm putting actually quite a lot of intention into the wire when I open and close like so. And this causes a great deal of work hardening. It means that in wear, your spiral is much more likely to stay like a spiral and not come undone. However, I am going to show you today a little bit of hammering, because for one thing it's fun, and for another thing it adds nice facets, little strikes on the wire, and it really does make everything quite tough. So I'm going to ensure that my two spirals are the same size, because I think I might use these as a symmetrical design. So in this instance, instead of doing a wrapped loop, I will want to do another simple loop so that they hang a similar distance from that neckline. So if you find that your wire is coming away from the very, very neat aspect at this stage, you can just undo that a few turns and start focusing a little bit harder. So I'm going to just undo that a little way, put a little bit of warmth back into the tail of wire I'm working, and then focus on making very small, very deliberate movements and pushing the spiral into my non-dominant forefinger whilst keeping everything super flat with those pliers as I rotate around the design. So it's very easy to become distracted, especially if you're talking. And what we're looking to do here, if you're using this as a centerpiece, it doesn't really have to match anything, but if you are looking to generate that element of symmetry, you will need to either count the number of rotations you're taking from that center position, or you will want to measure it across, whichever works best for you. The longer you take doing a design like this, the better it's going to look. So I think we're probably almost at the point where we're going to be matching the first one. You would definitely want to take more time than this with your design, just to make sure that it was nice and neat and tidy. And what I will probably do after the video is recreate this design a little bit more neatly. Just take your time and you'll get a nice smooth result. Well, that's about the same size. So when you're ready, you can pull that wire away and we're going to just draw that forwards. And this would be the same as if you were going to go for one of the wrapped loop spirals as I have on the design. Let's just bring that over a second. You can either go for a wrapped loop, or you can use the exact same technique to just trim away the tail. And then we're going to use round nose pliers to generate a simple loop. Sometimes I refer to them as open and closable loops, but it is just a simple loop. And then that will slide onto your design. So once you're happy with your design, as I say, I'm going to redo that one. We're going to grab in the miniature block and my chasing hammer. So what I will do is hang the hanging loop over the edge so I don't accidentally strike it, and then deliver some blows to this design. Now, in order to stop the spiral from coming undone, I'm going to hold the end section and the main body of the spiral whilst I hammer half of it. If you hammer without supporting the position of your wrapped loop, what may happen is the whole thing comes undone slightly. When you're ready to hammer the remainder of the design, you may wish to just focus on holding the loop over the edge to ensure that you don't cause any weakness in that angle change. So it's just a case of moving the design around and protecting your fingers until you get that second spiral ready to go. Please excuse my slightly breathless delivery today. My asthma is really not responding very well to the pollen. So I'm going to show you how to make one of these cool little spiral spools. spiky charms. Now you can size this up and make it as the centerpiece to your design, or you can use any of the components or any of the 3 videos I'm linking you as that centerpiece. Let's head back down to the board and we'll create one of these together, and then I'll show you how to finish off the main wire component of your collar. So we're going to make this little spiral spiky doohickey. You can make them much larger than the ones I'm making now. I've allowed myself 15 inches of 1mm or 18 gauge wire. And we're going to start in exactly the same way as we did for the 2 preceding designs, with a central spiral. Now I'm working right now with a copper colour craft wire. You could work with any wire that you choose, it doesn't really matter. So I've got that first round form started off, and I'm going to work to create a nice, even, strong spiral with 3 rotations from the start point. So we're going to go all the way around. We've gone once, twice, 3 times, and I'm now going to bring the wire away from that spiral at a little bit of an angle. So if I pop my bent chain nose pliers in and draw the wire out, it's quite a subtle change at this stage. I'm going to work with my bent chain nose pliers underneath, and I'm just going to bring the wire back towards that central spiral. So we're going to make a bit of a starburst design. Once I'm happy with the angles that I've created coming away from that nice circular form in the middle, I'm going to draw the wire back out again. Now at this stage you can really be as neat or as a little bit more rustic as you like, but what we're looking to do is have a reasonable repetition of both angle and size of each of the prongy bits that come away. So you can see now that this second angle I've just created is nowhere near strong enough. So in order to fix that, I'm going to hold the angle preceding it and then bring the wire back down towards the middle, and then just push that around until it sits exactly how I want. So we're going to try and keep the distance from the spiral to the tip to the spiral to the tip, repeating the same kind of distance. Doesn't matter if it's a little bit out, and what you'll need to do is just play around with that as you go to get that to sit exactly how you desire. You may need to just open and close that once or twice to refine those angles before bringing it back in again. And again, you can play with those angles as you go. It's always trickier to kind of get it lined up to the camera than it actually is to do it. So let's just push that pokey bit back towards the centre of the spiral, bring the wire back in again. Now you can make these really very, very quickly, but if you want to try and keep that element of symmetry, then you will want to play around with those little sticky outy rays or petals, whatever you want to think of it as, to make sure that they look reasonably similar in both size and the angles between them. You could put a mark on your pliers if you wanted to repeat that over and over again. And once you get back up to the top, you then have the choice of whether you want to go for a wrapped loop as we did at the beginning, or a simple loop as we did in the second section that we looked at together. So I'm just going to bring that wire back up from the centre like so. So you've got a triple spiral round the middle, and then you've got these little rays emanating out from that point. If you think that it doesn't look quite right, we're working with a reasonably soft wire today, so you can just play around with that until it sits a little bit more how your heart wishes it would sit. Once you've played around with it and you're happy, I might just open that out slightly just here. Bring the next one over, and even these very small refinements will all make a difference in how you feel about the little charm, or if you've sized it up, your beautiful centerpiece. When you get to the end, just taking those few extra seconds can make all the difference. So once you're happy with the design, we're going to put a little bit of a small distance for the neck up, and we're going to pull the wire forwards. We've got loads of wire left over. I'd hazard probably enough to create a second one. So I'm just going to go for a simple loop, bring that wire around, trim away at the crossover point. I've not made that terribly round, but I will fix that in just a second. So let's just pull that down into position. If you're going for a simple loop, make sure that the cut end of the wire meets the angle that you created, and then give it a really hearty squish and a squeeze to strengthen it up a little bit. You might want to play with the angles again just to make sure that you're happy. You can close up any of these little prongs that don't sit quite right, and you can open them if you need to as well. So just play around with that until you're absolutely delighted. Again, you could put this down onto the block and give that a little light hammering, making sure that none of those wires are crossing over the top of one or another. So there's a pair that reasonably are matched size-wise. So let's have a look at the project that we have thus far. So I'm using one of the little sunray coil designs that I showed you a video for. And then I've got a couple of the bead spirals or cages, which I'm using today as spacers. Then we've got some of those hammered closed coils that we made together. Then I might put another pair of bead spirals on. Then I might go for these little spiky chaps next. And then I might even be a rebel and add in a pair of these lovely ceramic beads that I found in the mix. If I don't like how that looks, I simply won't use them. It's fine. I'll put those back in the box. And then I've got an assortment of little bits and bobs that will also go in the box. And I can play around with that as a design later on. So let's bring in the bit that we started earlier, which was the very, very heavy collar that we're going to use to create this design. So once you've decided your order of items, we're just going to thread them on, making sure if there's a way up that you're respecting that way up, that they're all facing upwards. When I talk about a way up, I tend to keep the cut side of an open and closable or simple loop at the back of my designs. I think it looks neater. If you haven't worried about that, then don't fret, it doesn't really matter. It's just something to consider, because once you've made the J-hook on this end, it's very difficult to kind of go back and retrospectively fix unless you open up the simple hooks that you've made, the simple loops rather. So let's put all of the goodies on, remembering that you could use large hole beads. Let's just put that down on the board for a second and see what that looks like. I really like how that sits and clusters together. You could make much larger bead cages if you want those to sit further apart, or you could add in beads either side. I think I might play around with putting some of those beads on before we come to finish this off. Well, given the nature of my job, I managed to go and find some completely different beads in my stash. Found some gorgeous metal beads, which I liked the look of much more once it was all down on the board. So it's my prerogative to change my mind, as it is yours. You can play around with this design to your heart's content until we put that J-hook on. So let's just go and put that simple hook on the other end of our inexpensive wire collar. So I've messed around again and just decided that this is how I want my bits and pieces of odds and ends necklace to look. My wire collar. This is back where we started, so we've got that very heavy duty wrapped loop at one end, and then we've got all of the beads and the pieces that we made together coming all the way around to the far end. Now I've just put a little mark. This is the approximate size I want my final collar to be, which is around about 15 inches. And because we started with quite a lot of wire extra, there's about 3 inches of spare wire just on the end here. So at the point I want my collar to finish off, I'm just going to bring that wire forward slightly, like so, so I know exactly where it is I'm working. So what we're going to do now is just create a very simple J-hook. I might just bring the camera up slightly, so if you hold tight for a second. So I've crafted my collar to be around that 15 to 15.5 inch length, and I'm going to use the number 4 step on my bail makers again, which is the same size we used to create the round form at the beginning of the tutorial. So I'm going to start by rolling that wire gently around, bearing in mind it's just a little bit heavier than we're used to. Bring that tail all the way round over the top and just allow it to cross over at the angle we created. So we've got another round form, ever so slightly larger than the first one. We're then going to use the round nose pliers. Now, if your round nose pliers are a little bit flimsy, you may actually prefer to use a set of memory wire pliers. They're very, very good and strong. What we're going to do is use the smaller pin or your round nose pliers, and we're going to draw that tail of wire back out and around to generate a tiny loop on the end. So you can use, if you've got good strong round nose pliers, you can use your round nose pliers. As long as they've got a box joint, they should be fine. But because I'm working with very heavy wire today, that's a lovely alternative to have. What we're going to do now is trim that last sort of inch or so of wire away, like so, and you can see there's a gap at the moment, and that is purposeful. I've left that gap there because what I need to be able to do is close this loop up a little bit. So I'm just going to push that over and then very gently give it a little bit of a squish and then squash that down flat. Now this loop that I've created, the reason that I use number 4 on those bail making pliers is because that's the size I want across the top of the J hook, but I do want it to be more of a pear shape rather than a perfect round, so that when you come to fit that into your wrapped loop, everything just smushes together really neatly. Now I've been wearing collars made in this fashion for almost a decade now, and I've never had any issues with discomfort. You may prefer to do a wrapped loop on both ends and then generate your own type of clasp, or use the S hook that I showed you recently in another tutorial. Back in focus, here we have your completed project. All of this has been done using techniques you probably already know or are very easily able to pick up with a little bit of extra time. Very, very inexpensive little wire collar to create, and you don't have to have the beads if you don't want to. You can simply use those spirals as spacers. Well, thanks very much for watching. My name is Gem Hawks, and this has been your inexpensive wire collar tutorial today for YouTube. I think that they're really effective. It costs you pence. You can use up scraps of wire as well, because mixing your metals in projects like this is lots and lots of fun. There's loads of little bits of wire on my desk at any given time, so I can cut those up, use them to make little spirals or little flowers, whatever I fancy, and then throw it on some heavy wire to create an inexpensive wire collar. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.